Chapter 15. It's incredible how a difference in one event can have a profound effect on further events. Hermione's absence from Harry and Ron's company was not doing very well for their academic performance. Nobody else joined them. Everyone had already broken up to their companies, except for Neville. But he was already fine because he regularly hung out in greenhouses with Madame Sprout, and was engaged in plants. And Minnie treated the boy well, although there was no direct friendship. Neville's best friends are plants. I wonder what happens if I give him a cannabis sapling? Hermione and I systematically skipped Quidditch matches, receiving McGonagall's reprimands, but we knew how to bribe her. We just demonstrated our achievements in the field of transfiguration. We said that this was all thanks to hard work and training, but if we go to matches, when will we learn? McGonagall was moved by our desire for knowledge, and sometimes it seemed to me that a little more, and she would say something about me, but no. She didn't say anything. But she definitely recognized my absurd resemblance to Narcissa. And the rest of the professors are unlikely to suffer from blindness, but nothing good or bad happens to me. Like Draco, by the way, he does not show any negativity towards me, as well as positive I do not exist for him. He is completely immersed in a conflict with the hero and the sixth Weasley. In early December, I received a package from my relatives. We usually only correspond. I wrote about my successes. The Knights wrote about events in the outside world and even sent me regular newspapers. This time a package of tasks came from an ordinary school. "What is it?" Hermione asked at breakfast when she saw a bulky task bag dropped to me by an owl. I was even afraid that he would knock me to death. Death would be absurd. "Oh, this, Hermione, assignments from school." "From school?" The astonishment on her face defied verbal description. "But why? That is, an ordinary school?" "Well, yes." I shrugged, putting the package in my backpack with an invisible extension. I use it instead of a school bag. Convenient. It's not hard to carry things, and the capacity is large. But... Why? Well, what you mean, why? I was feigned surprise. What if I can't work out with magic? After Hogwarts, I will calmly go to college or even university and build a normal life in the Muggle world. If it doesn't work out here. This is genius. And how did I not think about it myself? Hermione quickly got up from the table and, throwing the strap of her bag over her shoulder, was about to leave the large hall. "I urgently need to write a letter to my parents." Hermione left and Harry, sitting next to me, looked at me in surprise. "What? There should always be a backup plan." "Nothing." Potter hesitated. "I just didn't even think that someone might want to return to the ordinary world because there is magic right here." "Who said that I want?" Potter and a few of the listening kids looked up in confusion. "There is such a word, it is necessary." "So that's it. As I said, in case of my total failure as a magician, I prepare myself. Escape routes. I don't seem to be a fool, so I think I can handle such a load." "Why are you all so obsessed with this studying?" Ron was indignant. "Not to even go to Quidditch or play gobstones. Or chess at worst. I don't have time for this. Life is too short to waste time." "But where is the hurry?" Ron was surprised. "You are pure blood. You'll not understand." "Hey! Our family treats Muggleborns quite well," Ron snapped. Now everyone at our table has listened to the conversation. I don't argue. It's just that purebloods are at the helm of the wizarding world. Even despite the fact how your family is called in their circles, you have more prospects than Muggleborns, even if you will do nothing during the whole time of learning. "You're wrong, Max," one of the guys from the senior year spoke up. "Both the legislation now encourages Muggleborns and the ministry. Console yourself with illusions, gentlemen. As if some pureblood in the 10th or 20th generation will give way to you under the sun. Oh well. You can find out all the information on these issues, and I will go to study." With these words I went to class. I still need to solve school assignments and send them back. For Christmas, Hermione and I decided to stay. More precisely, I already knew that I would stay. Still, Hermione decided that it is possible to rest in the summer, which is perhaps not worth it. I insisted that Hermione write a large congratulatory letter to her parents and send gifts in the form of magic sweets. Sugarless. I did the same myself, and the Weasley twins were the sweets supplier for a really modest sickle fee. I sent the school assignments with the school awl, and Hermione sent hers. According to her, her parents managed in record time to organize her external training and send tasks, and the stubborn girl solved them all in 2 days. Also, she finally got involved in physical exercise. Especially for this, I transfigured various sports equipment. Her parents also sent her a bunch of books on gymnastics and athletics. The only thing that disappointed me a little at Hogwarts was the inability to train with hemomancy and my spiritual weapons. I don't really believe there is even one place in this castle that can be hidden from the all-seeing eye of Dumbledore. Therefore, it is better not to shine such skills, just in case. Christmas itself passed unusually quietly in the empty castle. Hermione gave me a voluminous reference book on medical potions, and I remembered that I was interested in this topic. But I remember how Hermione watched as I performed the transfigured Shurnai Kendo kata. So I asked my parents to get one book Hagakure. I have this book, but somehow I don't want to shine it in front of the knights. They won't understand. Even I don't understand a lot, and the more I'm trying to understand it, the less I understand. Although a narrow-minded and straightforward person will consider Hagakure an unnecessarily cruel composition of a medieval samurai warrior, I reread it every year, and every year I see something new in it. And yes, the book is not related to kata, but I'm wondering what happens if you give it to Hermione. The Christmas holidays were held under the motto, "Take a break from school, study the gift." It was quite funny to watch how Hermione sometimes wrote something out of the book, crossed it out, rewrote. It seems that she adjusted the ancient warrior's wisdom to the local reality, taking into account the magic. I thought, why am I only communicating with Hermione? After thinking about this question, I came to simple conclusions. I'm just comfortable with her. She is smart enough to understand my periodic statements. She, like me, came here to study. Constant house sloppiness and carelessness do not interest me, as well as her. As a result, neither she nor I have anyone to communicate with. Everything suits me. Chapter 16. With the beginning of the new half-year, time flew faster than before. The monotony and productivity of our everyday life were off the charts. Hermione walked pensively, often missing what was being said around her. Sometimes she wrote something down in the black-bound notebook sent by all mail. I even got paranoid, and I examined it more closely. Just a notebook. Her training began to bear fruit, and the girl did not fall from fatigue after half an hour of practicing spells together with movement, and her arms did not hang down like a whip. I hardly got tired, but only if I stopped controlling the passive amplification from hemomancy. I found some interesting recipes in the Handbook of Medical Potions. It was a potion complex that is used to accelerate the recovery of the musculoskeletal system. There is a tonic effect, acceleration of muscle growth, strengthening bones, and so on. It would seem great potion, why doesn't everyone drink in liters? It turned out there are several problems. The course of potions can be drunk once every 6 months, not more often. For the course to really work, significant damage to the body is needed. As I understood from the description, the body itself indicates what needs to be corrected. If there is nothing to correct or heal, then the course of potions is wasted. Over this problem, we racked our brains in mid-February and found the answer in a simple confundus. Hermione came up with the idea, remembering stories about experiments with hypnosis. In these experiments, a person believed that a hot ember was brought to the skin, but a piece of ice was brought in reality. The man screamed in pain, and the skin swelled and blistered as if from a burn. Well, without charring and burning, of course. We sat opposite each other in our abandoned auditorium. So, are you suggesting that I put confundus on you while saying that I am placing coal on your hand? Exactly. Hermione nodded. And attach what? Ice. Do you think it will work? In theory, yes. But practically, now we will find out. Come on already. We practiced Confundus for about 3 days, and again theoretically, each of us could impose it on another person. I took out my wand and pointed it at Hermione. Confundo. Close your eyes. Red-hot coal will now be applied to your hand. I duplicated with words the mental message that was put into the spell, just in case. Hermione closed her eyes, and I conjured a glass of water. Glassifers. Ice immediately formed in the glass. I shook it out on the table and, taking it in my hands, put it on Hermione's finger. Ouch! She shouted sharply and, bringing her finger to her face, began to examine it. Well? Wait a sec. We just waited for a couple of seconds, and in the meantime, a small area on the finger turned red and began to blister. Working! Smiled the girl, but then frowned. However, now it hurts. We quickly ran to the hospital wing to see Madame Pomfrey, an elderly dryish meadow witch. She gave burn ointment and ushered us away. Now, all we need is a potion, thought Hermione, blowing on her finger. So we need to order the ingredients. How? Let's find out. The Weasley twins indulge in potions after school. Maybe someone else can perform our order, but at least this couple is known. We found them only in the evening in the common room. Gentlemen, I approached the group of twins and their black classmate with dreadlocks. They were sitting at a table in the back of the common room chatting about something merrily. Oh, Mr. Knight, the twins said in unison. What do we owe a visit from a brilliant person? Continued the first of them. I need some ingredients for the potions. No problems. The second nodded. Half a galleon for mediation and a must-have list. Payment on delivery, and remember, nothing forbidden. Finished first for the second. I agree. Now I will make a list. Okay, both twins answered with a smile. On a sheet of an ordinary notebook, I made a list in a few minutes using a standard pen. I returned to the guys, carrying 9 more shekels. Here. How long should I wait? I handed the list and money. The twins looked at each other. Let's send it now. The first asked the second. Let's go. The second nodded, and both looked at me. Tomorrow. After dinner. They again answered in unison and briskly ran from the common room to their own. I informed Hermione of the order's success, and she went to prepare the cauldrons and tools. Potions are brewed quite quickly, only half a day, although the recipe is rather complicated. If the ingredients arrive tomorrow, you can have time to cook everything and pour it into portions before the next potions lesson. I can't wait for tomorrow. The twins delivered the ingredients on time, I paid, and Hermione and I managed to prepare the potions quickly enough. All in the same abandoned classroom. Then we tormented ourselves with physical training until the evening, until our hands began to rise with difficulty. It was then that we imposed Confundus on each other with the formulation. Each cell of the musculoskeletal system requires regeneration. Drink the potions. It was awful. An incredibly intense pain gripped my body, even though we had not planned it. Through pain and gritted teeth, we struggled to get to the potions and drank them. I'm afraid that if it weren't for Confundus, we wouldn't have gotten to the bottles. It was only after the last potion was drunk that the pain subsided, but the effect was undoubtedly achieved. Now comes the fun part. It was awful, Hermione croaked, struggling to sit down at her desk. I followed her example, and it was not easier for me. I agree. We were silent for a while. But now, for a whole month, we will have super powerful regeneration of bones and muscles, which means we can train much more. Yeah. None of us expressed much joy. The next day I felt perfect, and judging by Hermione's eager eyes, so was she. In the wake of a good mood, we decided to spend this month entirely on training. Only begging Madame Pomfrey for strengthening potions, like winter cold, we don't want to get sick. We got them every time. The first thing we noticed was an increased appetite. And on the very first day of our frantic training, we ate for 2, almost more than the first year of our house. I had to start looking for a kitchen, and it's good that I remembered its approximate location. Not far from the Hufflepuff common room, there is a large still-life painting where you have to tickle a pear. In the kitchen, There was a whole horde of house elves, small gray-skinned humanoids. Thin, with huge pitiful eyes, disproportionate heads, and caricatured faces. I want to kill them out of mercy. They were so delighted with us that I began to worry about my integrity. They would take me away for souvenirs and rejoice at their piece of young wizards. We were immediately fed, watered, invited to come in at any time. Let me guess, I said to a thoughtful Hermione as we walked back to practice in our room. Do you think that house elf slave labor is used at Hogwarts? How did you guess? She wondered. Well, that's typical for you. Before you jump to conclusions, you need to know as much as possible about these creatures. Don't forget this is a world of magic. Logical, correct rules and norms from the ordinary world may simply not work here. I know, Hermione nodded. But I heard that house elves are not paid, they have no days off and vacations. Don't eat fairy pollen then. Why should I eat fairy pollen? Finally confused Hermione. Well, how is it why? All bowtruckles eat fairy pollen. But I'm not a bowtruckle. Hey! Do you understand now? The girl wanted to be indignant but thought for a moment. You want to say that they are not people, and therefore our values are alien. You need to find out everything. Perhaps in their category of values, they have even more than they need since they are so eager to work. This needs to be carefully considered. Chapter 17. Time again flew at a gallop. We trained, ate at Hogwarts, studied magic. When, after a month, the effects of the potions ended, Hermione suddenly remembered about the upcoming exams. She began to repeat the material she had covered with manic persistence. I repeated everything in a week, and I was in a rush to keep up with her. Not that I needed it, but she also shows unprecedented tenacity, catching up with me in the practical field of magic. I'm in the lead here. So we help each other. I am a practitioner, she is a theoretician. Each in our path we excelled at each other, and therefore we had to help each other regularly. Very convenient, I must say. At Hogwarts itself, everything was quiet and smooth. Malfoy pestered Harry and Ron. The older guys just poured shit on each other in their own way. Often there were clashes in which no one involved the younger, an unspoken rule. Children up to the third year have their own sandbox and their own paddles. The rest have their own. Nobody paid any attention to Hermione and me. Neither ours nor the Slytherins. Sometimes I had the feeling that every year, there was such a Malfoy and Weasley, who over time were the catalyst for the hostility of the whole course among themselves. Well, in general, no other reason simply existed. Absolutely. We rarely crossed paths even in class, and outside of them almost never. The only exception is the Great Hall. And so time went on, until the time for exams came. For Gryffindor, the past month and a half have been unfortunate. Harry and Ron managed to lose more than 200 points in a week, getting involved in the story with the Hagrid's dragon and pursuing Professor Snape. That's who has nothing to do. I honestly don't understand at all how Harry could defeat Voldemort. There is crazy luck, absurdity, power of love, and this is magic, Harry. But I don't give a damn about this, Potter. The students shuddered before the exams with terrible force. The 5th and 7th year students had the most challenging time. Do they have O.W.L.S. and N.E.W.T.S or whatever? Didn't bother to find out. But the first years were also worried. The first exams, how not to worry. I remember in a past life that I was also worried when I was faced with such a thing as exams at school. Phew, the teachers scared us then. I can't remember without laughing. However, the devil is not so terrible as he is painted, and I was once again convinced of this. The exams went on all week, one at a time every day, but they went off without a hitch. Hermione and I knew for sure that we got the highest marks in all subjects, without exception. Even Snape, twisting his face a little for appearance, will put his. Oh. In fairness, it should be noted that he could take points for anything, but he always evaluated potions without bias, a kind of professionalism of a master potion maker. And how could we cook something badly if we used his recipe and followed it exactly, monitoring the potion state? It is enough to be attentive, not too stupid, and not resemble the flock of sheep that the professor usually teaches. For once, Hermione and I got out into the street and sat on the shore of the lake, having arranged a small kind of picnic. Typical Muggle jeans and t-shirts, fine summer day, warmth, cool breeze, a basket of sandwiches assembled by the house elves. The final exam had just passed. Everything is fine. What do you think to do on vacation? Asked Hermione, examining now and then the tentacles of a giant squid peering out above the water, throwing stones dropped by the Weasley twins back at them. I do not know for sure. I will need to do assignments from an ordinary school visit sensei. Perhaps I will ask my relatives to go to France. France? Hermione looked at me with undisguised curiosity. Why not? It also has its own wizarding school, which means its own magical quarters, and other interesting things. I don't know much about it, but it didn't make it less interesting. Malfoy walked by in the company of his faithful companions Crabbe and Goyle. He slightly grimaced when he saw us, but without saying a word, he walked on. I decided to ignore him. I decided so long ago and still adhere to this position. Looks like Lucius didn't initiate him into his failure. Or, on the contrary, did he? Malfoy's behavior can be attributed to both, but I don't know the truth. Without the use of force, of course. You know, while we have a little time, we still need to finish off Protego. Hermione drawled thoughtfully, squinting at the floating clouds. You know, yes. I quickly collected the rest of the provisions in a basket, and we went to the castle. I met Ron and Harry along the way. They looked agitated, hungry, and confused. Hold on, guys. Handed them the basket. There are a couple of sandwiches. Oh, cool. The redhead was delighted, taking the basket. Thank you. Let's go have a bite, buddy. Heroic deeds are not done on an empty stomach. Potter nodded gratefully, and he was literally towed away by Ron. They're so lazy. I smiled. Like everyone else. Hermione stated indifferently. Chapter 18. There were visitors in our abandoned classroom. Percy Weasley and Penelope Clearwater Ravenclaw Prefect, average appearance. The girl almost sat on Percy's lap, and they were talking very nicely. Our appearance was noticed immediately, and Penelope literally jumped from her usual place, blushing a little. Percy kept up with her complexion. Hermione was not at all embarrassed by this picture. She just smiled out of the corner of her lips. Hello, Naughty! I waved my hand. A thought popped into my head. We have not seen anything if you show how to put Protego correctly. What? Percy tried to find the words, but his girlfriend quickly came to her senses. Deal, Penelope nodded. Percy looked at her, sighed, and agreed. What is your problem? Asked our prefect, and in his voice, there was slight hopelessness. We have no idea. I decided to conduct the conversation. Gestures and verbal formulas are correct, but not a single shield charm works. Show me. Penelope sat down on the table, and Percy stood next to her. Hermione and I took out our wands and took turns trying several versions of Protego. Normal, Duo, Reflecto Modification, Totalis. None of them even started. I know. Penelope, pleased with herself, jumped off the table. You didn't study from textbooks, did you? No. I shook my head. There is no such thing in the textbooks for our course. There is not much that is useful in terms of applied magic. We collected information in the library. Exactly. Held out Penelope. And there is material for already more or less accustomed to magic students. In the textbook for the third year, where shield enchantments are considered, there is a hint to them. It needs a mandatory visual image. In the textbook, for this purpose, magic photos are attached, and the teacher clearly demonstrates. Let me show you, and you will have the desired image. We agreed, of course. Penelope took out her wand. Protego. She waved her wand, and for a few seconds, the almost transparent wall of shield charm appeared in front of her. Its center was opposite the tip of the wand. The spell does not last long. It is fast. Also, You need to clearly imagine in which direction the shield will be turned. I see. We nodded and immediately decided to try. Protego. At the same time, Hermione and I waved our wands, and the shield wall appeared in front of us for a few seconds. We conjured it several times, changing direction, experimenting, and only after a couple of minutes we finished. Well done! Percy praised us. I, as the prefect, am proud of such first years. Not like some. Hermione liked the praise, even though she tried not to show it. Okay. Great. Penelope nodded. You also tried to study other shield charms? And you know gestures and formulas? I noticed that you have worked them out very well. Let's move on to duo then. We nodded and watched closely. Protego duo. Penelope waved her wand once again. In front of her wand, 2 walls of protective charm appeared colorless and bluish. The girl slightly twisted her wand in her hands, and the walls began to move to each other, as if covering Penelope from different sides. After a few seconds, they disappeared. Just like that. She nodded to herself. Quite a complicated enchantment. The colorless wall protects against conceptual spells, and the bluish wall protects against physical incarnations. Oh, do you know what that means? Of course, we knew. Energy aimed at changing the state of the object of influence. It can be various: freezing, explosive, incendiary, and other spells that do not carry a material component. Physical, just carrying a material component, attacking with multiple objects. Some ice spears, jets of fire, embodied physical objects. In general, a bluish shield protects against physical impact. So we nodded, saying, "We know. Now it's our turn to try." It was possible to create the shields the first time, but their separate movement only from the third. I had to clearly form a mental image of their movement. Simultaneously. It's like doing different things with your hands, it takes more practice. You guys are quite talented. Penelope was a little surprised but immediately moved on to the next spell. Protego Reflecto. A round translucent film appeared in front of her wand, but this time it was even and somewhat like glass. She held on until Penelope broke the spell. This shield enchantment reflects conceptual spells. It is worth remembering that they do not reflect in the opposite direction, do not reflect at the enemy. The angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection, Hermione said, and received a surprising nod from Ravenclaw Prefect. Exactly. Try it. We tried. On the third attempt, it was possible to put a more or less normal shield charm. It looks not very good, stated Penelope. But don't despair. More practice, and it will be great. You are doing amazingly well already. Many people have to make 24 attempts for a charm of this level, and this is in senior years. Let's go further. The girl made a much more difficult pass with her wand, and this time she was surrounded by a gray transparent sphere, like a soap bubble. She trembled a little and disappeared after a few seconds. It doesn't work well for me. Notes of sadness were heard in her voice. Wanna try? But if it does not work out, do not despair. This is one of the most difficult shield charms to hold. We tried 5 times and managed to create a quivering sphere. Percy pulled out a piece of parchment, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it lightly at my shield. It blocked the blow but immediately disappeared. The same fate befell Hermione. Not bad. Not bad, he nodded. My first totalist let me down, and with the same piece of paper, I got exactly in the forehead. Ha! Penelope laughed, patting the embarrassed Weasley on the shoulder. And I remember your face then. Hermione and I thanked the seniors and went to the library. I don't want to look for a new class, and ours will probably not be free soon. Chapter 19. Chapter 19. The next day was memorable for Harry and Ron being in the hospital wing. Nobody knows what happened, but I have a guess. They either failed on the test strip, or they did manage. Few options, right? The fact that they went in search of adventure, as soon as everyone went to bed, I knew we live in the same room, whatever one may say. Well, to hell with them. At the festive feast in honor of the end of the school year, we will find out everything. Those couple of days before the feast, Hermione and I did a lot of magic to nausea. Muggle-borns are not allowed to do magic on vacation, and as I have learned, there are several reasons. The likelihood of a violation of the statute of secrecy, and the absence of an adult wizard to prevent mistakes, or the sad consequences of improper magic. That is, in fact, you can use magic, but only where there are adult wizards and not in the Muggle world. Therefore, we conjured until we lost our pulse. On the day of the feast, when Harry and Ron were discharged from the hospital wing, the entire house learned of their adventures. They passed the streak, although the devil's snare caused them problems, as well as the puzzle with poison, wine, and potion. In secret to the whole world, Ron told that the Philosopher's Stone was hidden in the Forbidden Corridor, and now it is destroyed. We came to the feast in a somewhat depressed state. Firstly, we were simply tired, and secondly, the house's general mood was conveyed to us a loss on points. Total loss. Last place. Before the feast began, Dumbledore announced the results, confirming our last place. But he wouldn't have been Dumbledore if he hadn't done a feint with his ears. However, we did not take into account the recent events, he continued weightily, standing in front of the silent hall. To Mr. Ronald Weasley, for the best chess game in Hogwarts history, I award 80 points to the Gryffindor house. Percy was happy, the house was happy, the others were perplexed. Hermione sat there, like me, but she didn't say anything. To Mr. Harry Potter, Dumbledore continued, and the hall was completely silent. I seemed to hear Snape's brow twitch. I award 90 points to the Gryffindor house for unprecedented courage and iron restraint. A few seconds of deathly silence, and the hall literally exploded with the joy of the Gryffindors, the Slytherins' anger, and a mixture of these emotions from the rest of the houses. So, the director spoke again, but no one really listened to him. First place is taken by Gryffindor. Dumbledore clapped his hands, and the numerous banners throughout the room changed color from green to scarlet. The Slytherin crest changed to that of Gryffindor. With an expressionless face, Hermione was trying to get up and leave because it was all entirely against the rules. I'm sure she perfectly understood that now our house in general and Potter, in particular, would be disliked, and that's putting it mildly. Still, I held her back by the hand, pulling her back into place. This is how hatred, anger, and envy are born, I said quietly to her while students were going crazy around. This is disgusting. She grimaced. What? Don't you like that we have one? Said Ron, who suddenly drew attention to us, and with him Harry and many nearby. Instead of Hermione, who seemed to have decided that there was no point in explaining anything, I spoke up. You received points for leaving the living room after lights out, walking along the corridors of the castle, sneaking into the Forbidden Corridor, burning a valuable magical plant, breaking 2 school brooms, smashing a valuable artifact of the last few hundred years, and dooming Flammel to death. How lovely! Death and destruction is a Gryffindor's worthy deed. You know nothing! Ron flushed, indignant, and many others were outraged. I'm not saying you did the wrong thing. I shrugged. But really, none of this happened, and you did not break a bunch of rules? I don't care, to be honest. You survived, and thank Merlin. That's it. Ron lifted his nose proudly, and Hermione looked at me reproachfully. The students continued their congratulations. Food and drinks appeared on the tables. This is all terribly unfair, and I have conflicting feelings, Hermione told me quietly. We seem to have one, but such disgusting sediment on my soul. I understand. Why did you support them? Did I? I said what I thought but did not develop the conflict. Anyway, no one will understand anything. Let's eat, the road is long. You're right. After the feast, everyone went to collect their things. We were given warnings about the prohibition to conjure during the holidays, the results of exams in which Hermione and I shared the place of the best student for 2. We got to the train again by boats, accompanied by the same Hagrid. Hermione and I quickly occupied an empty compartment and locked the door with colloportus. I decided to sleep, and Hermione pulled out some massive book and sat down to read. I did not notice how I fell asleep but woke up already literally in London. Get up! I opened my eyes and saw Hermione shaking my shoulder. What? The brain did not work immediately, but almost instantly. Have we already arrived? Yes. There was no need to change, so we quickly got to the platform, found the luggage carts, and drove off to the Muggle side of the station. In the parking lot, John was already waiting for me in his BMW 5. Hermione seemed to have noticed her parents and pulled me to meet them. Mom, Dad! The girl immediately threw herself into their arms, and the joyful parents could not help but reciprocate. John seemed to have noticed a bustle nearby. He got out of the car and walked towards us, welcoming me with his hand. When we all gathered in one company, Hermione hurried to introduce us. Mom, Dad, get acquainted. This is Maximilian Knight, my classmate and friend. Max, this is my mom and dad Jean and Paul Granger. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Mr. This is my father, John Knight. I introduced the approaching father. It's good that we are not in a secular society. Otherwise, we can go on like this all day long. Her parents started the same small talk. Be sure to write to me, Hermione said in a rather important tone, as, in fact, always. And don't forget about the schedule of the day. Of course, Fluffy. I hugged the girl and patted her randomly curly hair. Hey! What? You have not paid attention all year, but now I am a Fluffy? She was genuinely indignant. It's a Knight's move, Hermione. Knight's move. With a smirk, I went after my father, who had time to say goodbye to the Granger couple. The adults smiled mysteriously. I am plagued with vague doubts that they have already imagined something weird. Chapter 20. Home sweet home. How much in this phrase? I do not mean the structure itself, but the fact of being out of school. I again took up training with hemomancy, without fear of total control, as in Hogwarts. Although I can't do anything particularly global. The creation of a bloody sphere shield is similar to Protego Totalis, but the protection level is unknown. It is hugely problematic to verify it. In general, regarding hemomancy, I am tormented by vague doubts that until the end of Hogwarts, it will not remain at the best level of development if summer training will not give the proper growth in the volume of manipulations and their quality. After graduation, it will already be possible to come to grips with this training, but for now, this is only a small trump card in the sleeve, like a sword. By the way, there is also a lot of unclear about the sword. Since he is a part of me, I feel that he is far from just a piercing cutting tool for doing good, but no matter how much I tried to listen to my feelings, I could not understand anything new. Having thought about it, I decided that it was not worth going back to Kendo in terms of attending classes. For 2 weeks, I was engaged only in hemomancy, regular training, and other things. Besides, I had to go shopping with the Knights. I grew out of clothes. The magic one, it turns out, can adjust itself within small limits. Still, even they became short, and I noticed this only upon arrival. The usual tracksuit was rather loose, so I did not notice any notable changes, but they, it turns out, are there. And how did I fit into jeans? Mystery. In mid-July, the Knights delighted me with the fact that they heeded my request and decided to go to France. We let our all go to get food on its own because we won't take it with us. The training camp was held in record time, as were the preparation of documents and tickets purchase. On the 15th of July, we decided. On the 17th, we had already set foot on the land of the least resistance, in Paris. At customs, a man in civilian clothes approached us and, presenting documents confirming that he was an Auror, asked to follow him. He led us into a separate spacious room with an examination table, armchairs, and a couple of some kind of ficuses and pots in the corners. Please give me your wand and magical items for inspection, he said almost without an accent. I removed the wand holster from my forearm, took out the wand itself, and laid it on the table. John opened the suitcase and put my backpack on the table. Aurora took a tiny, incomprehensible cube from his pocket, and placing it on the table, waved his wand over it. The cube grew into some kind of ivory-colored artifact board. Aurora put my wand on the board and made a couple of his passes. Permit me to check the backpack, monsieur? He asked, looking at me. The question is clear on such backpacks, you can find a variety of protective charms. You should always ask the owner for permission or just crack them if the owner will protest. Yes, of course. I nodded, and the owner, opening my backpack, held a magic wand over it. No prohibited goods were found, he declared, now holding my wand over the board. Acacia, dragon hard vein, 12.5 inches. What is the purpose of your visit to France, monsieur? Knight. Maximilian Knight. These are my father and mother, John and Sarah Knight. Tourism. My parents have already been in France, but not in Paris, and I'm curious about the local magic quarter and everything else. Orr nodded, made a couple more passes over the board, and a small card like a driver's license appeared out of nowhere. Orr handed it to me and took a colored brochure out of his pocket. Here, Monsieur Knight, are your documents for a temporary stay in magical France. Check out the brochure for all the information you need to know about neighborhoods and places to visit. Then the Aura returned my wand and backpack and only then smiled slightly. Welcome to France. I hope you will take only good impressions with you. Of course, monsieur. We stayed in a fairly decent hotel near the Place de la Bastille. The choice fell on these neighborhoods due to the close location of everything interesting, including the Magic Quarter. For several days, the Knights and I walked around Paris, visiting various and even exciting places. The most, as it seemed to me, funny the differences. Differences from what was in a past life. Different cars, different fashion, different signs. I was in Paris in a past life, walked the streets, listened to street musicians, visited all sorts of places. The difference is enormous, and it lies in people. You don't see it, you don't notice, but now people are more open, smile, communicate, look around with interest. In my time, everyone was immersed in smartphones and gadgets, not noticing anything. It seemed that even walking next to each other, people corresponded with each other and did not talk. We were able to make our way to the Louvre, walk around the Sorbonne, look at Versailles and visit Notre Dame. Impressive cathedral, really? It creates an indescribable impression of heaviness, massiveness. The Magic Quarter was different from the one in London. On the one hand, the differences are colossal, but on the other, none. The entrance to it was hidden behind an invisible door in a luscious pink candy store. As soon as you pass through these doors, you find yourself on a stone-paved smooth straight street with other roads' intersections. The houses around are neat, level, lined up close to each other, and have different floors. But most of all, the differences in style are the medieval half-timbered houses. This style is the first that comes to mind when talking about medieval France, Germany, and other European countries. White walls with wooden beams and cross struts, small windows, sharp, high roofs. Pretty sweet. Just like on Diagon Alley, you could see here owls flying overhead with letters and parcels, various flying airplanes, origami-like birds, and lanterns floating in the air. But there is also an important difference: the style of clothing of local wizards. He is more Muggle, but there are some subtle differences. Mantles are common here but not as loose. These could be capes, some design solutions at the junction with other clothes, dresses, greatcoats, coats, jackets, etc. They did not shy away from clothes of different cultures, looking for some new fashion trends. For example, I saw several young wizards in the likeness of Chinese qipao, still at the same time in pants or without cuts. After all, although France in general and Paris, in particular, are in some way trendsetters, it is not customary to bare your legs too much. In general, the magical quarter of Paris made a much more pleasant impression, light, airy, but this is all, as they say, to each his own. Someone quite likes London gloom and heaviness. My biggest problem is my insufficient knowledge of the language. I know French mediocre, I can introduce myself and ask for directions, but a constructive dialogue is beyond my abilities. It would seem, what is the problem? English is an international language. But it seems that they forgot to tell the French wizards about it. I even decided to correct this injustice. Well, I mean, learn the language. To do this, I bought a fairly large number of books in a regular bookstore, and in another store a bunch of videotapes with films, because you will also need to hear the language. The next morning I informed the knights that I had gone to the magic alley and left the house. There is no need to buy anything else, and I spent so much money, and I also need to buy for Hogwarts. The only thing that interested me more or less was magic literature, but I did not rush with it. The language is still unknown to me, and taking books at random is stupid. Therefore, I just walked, sat in a magic cafe, looked at people. I was about to go home, and even left the magic quarter when suddenly I felt some kind of faint push from behind and began to fall into darkness. Chapter 21. Mr. Knight. The speaker's voice came to me like through a thick layer of water, quietly, muffled. Eyesight did not return to normal immediately, but the blonde silhouette became clearer and clearer with every second. Someone other than the blonde was standing nearby. Mr. Knight. After blinking a couple of times, I was finally able to focus my vision and finally recover. Finally, you are with us, Mr. Knight. This time, the phrase sounded clear, and I recognized Lucius haughtily pulling the word. I must say that he does it infinitely better than the pathetic parody like Draco. A suspicious-looking man was standing next to him. Hunched over, stooped, with warts on his face. This second man created the most fabulous image of some wizard from the swamps. Listening to my feelings, I noticed that I was lying on some kind of flat cold surface in a rather dark and gloomy room with uneven stone walls and a pair of dim magic lamps. I'll not say that I'm glad to see you. My voice was hoarse, and I clearly needed to wet my throat. But it looks like these gentlemen are not going to comply with this simple request. It's mutual, Mr. Knight. Lucius literally spat out the last words, although there was a suspiciously pleased light in his eyes. You probably want to say something? Certainly, Mr. Knight. Lucius smiled wryly. Let me be frank with you, Mr. Knight. Lucius leaned over slightly and moved over. Oh, so he sits on a chair. You can't even imagine how disgusting even the fact of your existence is to me. Lucius uttered the words slowly, and especially slowly those that expressed his attitude. I would have been happy to get rid of you much sooner, but until recently, I thought there would be no need for that. And what was my surprise that you turned out to be a wizard. Although my son and I consider you only a squib with a wand, and I think we are not far from the truth. Isn't it? Finish it already. The second man began to grunt in a hoarse voice. Your pathological craving for soulful conversations in the style of a world villain will bring you to your grave one day. Lucius looked at the second old man indifferently. Yes, after he spoke, I realized that he was far from young. You're right, my old friend. I'm expecting something new from you. Lucius stood up, leaning on his cane, and without looking in my direction said, Goodbye, Mr. Knight. Lucius left the room. The old man and I looked at each other for about 10 minutes. Well, nothing personal, boy. The old man croaked in a hoarse voice, and I realized that it was time to run. Although I realized this a long time ago, there are some nuances. For example, I cannot use magic and hemomancy. I felt it clearly. Looks like my displeasure showed on my face. Hee. The old man walked around. If you are chained, you will not be able to use magic. We don't want unexpected situations, do we? The old man walked around, scattered some herbs and powders, and muttered something quietly under his breath. The only thing I can do is summon the sword. But my hands are shackled in such a position that I cannot really use them. So what should I do? He made a few more circles, and on one of the circles, below me, something dimly glowed red. Well? The old man went somewhere out of sight and a minute later returned, weakly rattling chains. Heavy, huh? The old man puffed, dragging in his hands a huge thick book, tied and chained. It was the chains that rang. He held the book vertically above my chest, at a distance of 30 centimeters. Another piece of knowledge. How wonderful! How lovely! The old man muttered to himself. Also, I should share with the peacock. But the peacock brought a sacrifice. The old man's eyes were clouded. He removed his hands from the book, but it remained in the air, and the chains were filled with a red light. The old man walked around me on the other side, to the right, and stood almost close. This is a chance. The old man took out a dagger and, without preamble, brought it to my chest. I immediately materialized the sword in my hand, directing it so that the blade pierced the old man when it appeared. I felt a light weight in my hand, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the stunned face of the old man. He stared into nowhere, a trickle of blood escaping from his mouth with a hoarse exhalation. Moving my gaze below, I realized that the blade pierced both the heart and the lungs at the same time. The old man began to fall, but what a bastard! His dagger was incredibly sharp, no worse than my sword. A sharp, severe pain almost made me scream. Blood gushed from my chest. Oh shit! He ripped my chest. Chapter 22. Chapter 22. A strange grey room. It is similar to the one I have just been in but much larger, higher. "Aya! No!" a familiar hoarse voice yelled, and I turned to look at him. There was a large black figure, as if woven from fog, with red eyes, a long tongue sticking out of its mouth with huge white teeth. This figure with black tentacles pulled the old man's ghostly silhouette to itself, preventing all attempts to resist. Guesses, one after another, ran wildly in my head, but only one finally took shape. Sacrifice to a demon or soul in a book for knowledge. Sounds logical? The unknown creature has practically drawn the old man to itself. But I'm from Gryffindor, after all. I materialized the sword in my hand with one movement, and jerked towards the monster with astonishing speed. Here I moved even faster than in reality. Much faster. A brief moment, and I'm already starting to shred the creature. "Arg!" It growled but continued to bite off pieces from the old man. Without blood. Without anything, the old man's ghost lost a transparent piece with every bite but continued to kick and yell. On the back of the creature, where I stubbornly inflicted an innumerable number of blows, another mouth and eyes appeared. Target! That's even better! With a couple of stabbing blows, I gouged out his eyes, and now the other mouth screamed. Just in case, I tried to summon magic or hemomancy, but it turned out to be useless. It worked. I knew that for sure, but it didn't make sense here. Punch! Punch again, tentacle block, cut off the beast's tentacle. Block, hit, hit. All attention was focused on hitting, and hitting again. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that the cut-off black parts fade away, disappear, and the creature's silhouette decreases but retains proportions. At one point, the creature fell, and its silhouette instead of black became red and more material. "Wait!" the creature croaked. "PFFF, sure. Today I will be Ron Weasley, and I don't understand the words." A couple more blows, and with the last of them, the silhouette emitted a painful cry and began to dissipate in space. The red mist, upon which the creature had dispersed, began to be drawn into the blade. It was as if the scream of a creature was heard high in the mountains, and the red fog even had hands that desperately clung to the void, but it was still dragged away. Finally. What was it? There is no shortness of breath and no normal body sensation. Only now I realize that my hands are translucent, like the rest of me. It's a shame. Emotions are smooth and calm. No panic. Nice. I don't know how much time I spent here, but it was the most boring period of my life. There are no desires or needs. Nothing to do. Boredom. "Oh, I found you!" came the voice of the familiar old man. That's right, with a capital letter. "I take the offender, well done! Hey, you said that I will not see you again. But you don't see me. Why are there only idiots around?" After these words, sounding like from everywhere, my sword reappeared in my hand, completely without my will. A tiny red ball burst out of it and disappeared with a squeal. "Old man?" Silence. "Hey!" Silence again. "Fuck you then, old man. What should I do now?" I continued to walk around the room, examining the walls, ceiling, floor. The room is empty. Absolutely. At one point, I decided to look a little better at these walls. Something felt wrong about them. I looked closely and was incredibly surprised. There were small words, symbols, and diagrams on every brick. They were so small that it was almost impossible to notice them even on close inspection. I don't know how long I stared at all this, trying to figure out the symbols and language, but at some moment, a feeling of irritation ripened in my soul. Light, weightless, but in the complete absence of everything else, it was very bright. I materialized a sword and pierced a brick with it. And why didn't I think of this before? The brick began to dissolve and be absorbed by the sword. As soon as it disappeared, something seemed to click in my head, but I did not notice any changes in consciousness. I dug into myself for at least a subjective day, but I didn't find anything. Then I decided that I could try to absorb all the bricks. Why not? It will hardly be worse. Time passed, I absorbed the bricks with the sword at great speed, but behind the bricks, there were other bricks, behind them more and more. Afraid that after I dig through the wall all this will collapse and disappear, or what is the mechanics in this dimension, I began to absorb the bricks in layers. First one, then another, and so on. As before, I did not feel any changes but continued to work. It is not always possible to feel something right away. Once I got to the bottom of what I think is the last layer. Thin rays of soft light erupted between the bricks. Having pierced one brick in this layer, I absorbed it, and a soft yellow light poured out of the hole that formed in the wall, filling everything around with an intolerable radiance every moment. A bright flash and the world literally turned upside down. Recovering after such a sharp flash, I could not help but notice that once again, I lay on the cold flat surface, still chained. My chest is covered with blood, and on top of all, this is dusted with a hefty portion of black and gray ash. It was impossible not to feel the difference between a living body and that spiritual shell. I literally felt the pulse with my whole body, and this was the most vivid sensation. The second brightest is the desire to go to the toilet. After materializing the sword in my hand, I tried for several minutes to cut off my shackles with the blade without cutting off my arm or leg. After a while, I succeeded, and after a couple of minutes of neatly cutting the strange, tight-fitting chains on my arms and legs, I was free. It turns out that I was lying on the most ordinary table. Iron table. Nearby lay the corpse of an old man. Blood was still leaking from under it, which was very strange. Feels like I stayed there for at least a month, which is quite weird, but okay. That's even better. Unable to restrain my natural urges, I did my dastardly deed in the corner of the room and headed for the exit. There is nothing to do anyway. The only door opened onto a narrow spiral stone staircase upward. Carefully and quietly climbing it, I stopped in front of the next door and listened in silence. Having pushed the door open, I found myself in a rather simple house, in the setting more like a hunting one. Everything is made of wood, tables, chairs, bed. There were only 3 rooms here. An improvised kitchen with unknown devices. Surely something magical. Living room with fireplace, a large rug, a couple of comfortable homemade sofas, armchairs, and a table. I went out, apparently in the master's bedroom. Closer analysis revealed that this house was not used as a home. There was not a single sign of life here, no products, no tools, supplies, or anything else. There was a small layer of dust everywhere, and only a couple of paths were trodden on the floor, but it was almost imperceptible. After checking everything for some interesting things and finding nothing, I climbed into the last unchecked place, a chest in the master's room. It turned out to be almost empty. Some kind of pile of papers, judging by the printed text statements and invoices. Some stones, a box, a purse with nearly 200 galleons, and most importantly, my scabbard with the wand. And why didn't he throw them away? Resale? Maybe. After bringing myself in relative order, I left the house and fell into some stupor. I was standing almost in the middle of the park. Turning around, I saw neither the house nor the door. I even waved my hand but only stumbled upon an empty space. Walking around the neighborhood, and this time without losing my guard, I discovered that this is not just a park, it's damn Butte-Chaumont. This is how wizards do their dark deeds under the very noses of ordinary people. I went to the hotel on foot. That was an exciting trip. Chapter 23. From the very first night after the incident with the ritual, I started having dreams. Nightmarish, sometimes disgusting. Many characters from the most diverse imaginable and unthinkable races fought, used magic, participated in rituals, and everything would be fine. Still, the consequences of this magic were terrible: torture, murder, painful death. They made different monsters from the victims, set them on defenseless villages. This stream of cruelty did not stop for a second, and only in rare moments was replaced by more pleasant and safe spells and rituals aimed at creation and healing. Every night, I woke up several times in a cold sweat. These dreams were not forgotten, they seemed to be carved in stone in my memory, and even if I wanted to forget them, it was all in vain. This is very unpleasant. On a couple of occasions I checked in with Hermione through an owl. The knights named the owl Pirate. She always covered one eye, bristled feathers on her head, and instead of hooting, gave out, "Ho ho ho," while walked pretty fast on the table, throwing her gaze to the sides with one eye. Hermione sent whole manuscripts about how enjoyable her holidays were, her trip to France, what she saw, what she heard. In general, she should write books. I also briefly told about Paris, about the Magic Quarter. How visually close it is to an ordinary city, and that the differences are visible only in shops, establishments, or magical park areas. I haven't said anything about my adventure yet. Physical training saved me from constant, almost every second stay in nightmares. These thoughts sucked me in, and even the nights became a little worried. I was also wondering what to do with Lucius. It is highly undesirable to touch him until Voldemort is revived. Or should it be prevented entirely from reviving? But how? It is unknown if his snake is a Horcrux at this time. I have no way to destroy them. Carrying them with you is completely unacceptable because of their effect on the psyche. If we assume that Dumbledore is a good grandfather, and could not feel such an artifact at Hogwarts, then I can hide it. They will not be found. But on the other hand, what if Dumbledore is bad? Most likely, he is neither bad nor good. He is just a person with his own goals and interests, for which he is ready to go to great lengths, like many other people. He is no different from them. But my thoughts took me somewhere else. What to do with Lucius? He will know very quickly that I am alive and will probably try to somehow influence, or try again. And why did I not please him? Irritating. I can try to eliminate him, but where will Voldemort live then? In general, there is still too much unclear. We will solve problems as they come. Towards the middle of August, Hermione wrote, and we agreed to meet at the Leaky Cauldron to go shopping. But before that, I had to buy clothes again due to constant training, abundant nutrition, and possibly hemomancy. I began to grow rather quickly. Not phenomenal, but the clothes are getting too small. I even had to take a little for growth. I came to the famous place, in black trousers, shoes, and a thin black turtleneck. I was in such a mood that everything except black was irritating. I always went on trips to the magic quarters without the knights at their own request, so this time I went into the establishment alone. There were not so many people here, I would even say empty. At one of the tables sat Hermione. She was also in almost all black except for a dark blue blouse. She had already thrown on her robes and looked around expectantly. Her parents were sitting next to her and drinking juice. Wasted no time, I walked over and greeted. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Granger." Hermione. Last time I didn't really look at them, but now I decided to take a closer look at this married couple. Hermione's mom seemed pretty young, in her early 30s, although I have no idea how old she really was. With unruly hair, the girl definitely went into her, as well as some facial features. Hermione's face passed from her father's straight and very slightly upturned nose. Like the eyebrows, they are also paternal. "Max!" Hermione shouted joyfully and, instantly jumping up from her seat, tried to squeeze the insides out of me with her crushing embraces. But she attacked the wrong one. But the tighter you hug Hermione, the happier she is. And I'm half a head taller than her. Maybe even a little more. Well, Fluffy, I'm glad to see you too." "Oh, you!" Hermione wanted to pull away, but I still held her, so she glared up at me and banged her fist a couple of times in the chest. Ahem. The girl's father coughed into his fist. You'll have time to talk, young people. Now maybe you'll already go shopping? Mrs. Granger just smiled. One moment, I let go of Hermione and, throwing off my backpack, pulled out my robe. I shook it off with a light movement. Oh, it's quite unusual, said Hermione. Yeah. I took it in Paris. Slightly different design, not so baggy. Look. Hermione turned to her parents. And I said that there can be many interesting things in the Magic Quarter. Calm down, daughter, Mrs. Granger replied with a smile. This is not your last trip to France. On that note, Hermione's parents rose from the table. Well, Mr. Knight, her father said officially, with a serious expression on his face but a frivolous look. I hope I can trust you, our Hermione, on this shopping trip? Certainly, Mr. Granger. Dad, but you wanted to go and look. We actually wanted to see you off. Mr. Granger scratched his head. We're worried about you after all. Yeah. Hermione folded her arms across her chest. So it's okay to let me go alone with the boy. Max doesn't seem like an unreliable person, Mrs. Granger said convincingly, so much so that I believed in myself. How does it work for women? I will never understand. Here, I agree. Hermione nodded significantly. Well then, I'll show you everything another time. On that and decided. Hermione and I headed to Diagon Alley and her parents to walk around London. We agreed to meet at the Leaky Cauldron in 3 hours. Chapter 24. Diagon Alley was crowded, as always, but Flourish and Blot stood out in particular. There was just an incredible crowd of women of all ages. Just don't tell me, Hermione, that you chose this particular day for this. I could not help but grimace at the sight of the crowd. Max. This is the great writer of magical England. It would be sacrilege not to attend such an exclusive press conference. Moreover, his books are recommended as textbooks. Which is definitely strange. That's it. Let's go through the rest of the stores first. And I need to go to the bank, change money. Me too. And so we did. First, we went to Gringotts and exchanged some pounds for galleons at the first free counter. I still had a little bit after my trip to France, plus the loot from that house, so I'm not in distress, but I tried to split the cash into 2 parts, half in pounds, half in galleons. I dragged Hermione into the store for bags, chests, and other junk with the invisible expansion charm. Why, Max? The girl asked when we entered the store. You have a backpack. And you do not want some? I want. But I'll do it myself. Someday. But the use of such a spell is prohibited. For the sake of safety and greater control of the wizards to the ministry. A very bold statement. The salesman chuckled, not distracted from some work behind his counter. He held his wand like a writing pen and was drawing something very carefully on a large piece of leather. I think so myself. The salesman glanced at us. You can't even imagine how expensive a license is. But more to the point. He straightened up and tucked his wand back into the sheath at his belt. How can I help you? My self-confident friend, apparently, does not need anything. Maybe later. Hermione nodded in agreement and lightly poked me in the side with her fist. And I need a bag with an invisible extension. I may have to put large objects in it with a contraindication to decrease. Consider this, please. Okay, wait for a second. The seller, lost in thought, came out from behind the counter and walked somewhere deep into the store. I would have said that myself. Hermione whispered softly. And you said so? For several minutes of waiting, we walked around the store, looking at certain goods. After all, not only useful things were here, but also beautiful ones. Here. From behind the shop windows came a seller with the most ordinary black cloth bag. Not the most aesthetic thing, but it meets your requirements. The seller demonstratively untied the ties on the neck and opened it as much as possible. Indeed, a huge thing. Small in appearance, but the neck is really huge, and when opened, the bag looks more like a bowl, in which nothing is visible. Perfectly. I take it. After paying for the bag, folding it tightly, and putting it in my pocket, I took Hermione through the rest of the shops and, first of all, the ingredients for the potions. Then we ran into Madame Malkin's store. There were many people today, and right now, 3 Malkin assistants were working with clients. Hello, young people. From the entrance to the workshop, where they are engaged in sewing, a satisfied Madame Malkin came into the trading floor. She was still small in stature, just as plump, but the mantle and the costume's general tones moved to gentle turquoise and sea waves. Hello. We greeted at the same time, which caused the affection of Madame. Are you here for the sets of clothes to Hogwarts? Then Madame noticed my robe. Oh, beautiful French model. Excellent choice, young man. Come in, now we will organize a free place for taking measurements. We followed Madame, maneuvering between mannequins and display cabinets with pieces of fabric. When we reached the large mirrors with a stool, we finally stopped. Let's start with the young lady. And you, young man, can sit down and familiarize yourself with the catalog for now. There was indeed a comfortable sofa nearby, and behind the stool was a fitting room. I sat down on the sofa and began leafing through the magazine. At the same time, various meters and rulers fluttered around Hermione on the stool. Back to Lockhart's work, I said, turning the page of a men's fashion magazine. Doesn't it seem strange to you that fiction was recommended as textbooks? Perhaps they just didn't find anything better? Well, it's unlikely. There are many textbooks, and almost every year, there are some interesting editions from different authors. It is textbooks, which is important. Perhaps the ministry thought that books authored by a wizard with the Order of Merlin of the 3rd degree are better? And what does the ministry have to do with it? I raised a blank look at Hermione. How is that? After all, it is there that the standards for teaching aids are established. Yeah. But data has been given at the mercy of visiting professors for many years. It is the professors who determine which textbooks will be used to teach children. At least that's what they say. So the new professor decided that these books would be better. Hermione shrugged. So this professor is highly incompetent. Fiction is mostly embellished with lies or even completely misinterprets facts. This is done to please the reader such a genre. What kind of professor will teach children such an important subject as data, using such literature? Remember our problem with Protego? Of course. And how would we learn the spell if we learned it from such books? You can still spice up history lessons with fiction, but not practical exercises. Then an absurd fantasy appeared in my head, in which the process of making a potion was artistically painted. And Snape, burning such a book with fiend fire. I couldn't help but smile. What's so funny? Hermione asked, sitting down beside me. Taking measurements is over. I've imagined how Snape would have felt about potion fiction. Hermione smiled. By the way, she was suddenly so struck by her recollection that she shocked herself. Professor Flitwick stands on Lockhart's books in class. Ha! I didn't even notice. Surely a master like Flitwick would not publicly show such disrespect for worthy books. I still recommend buying normal textbooks. But we still need to take a couple of Lockhart's books. And get an autograph. What? They can then be resold. Autographs are always valuable. Enterprising furry. I could not resist and smiled. Oh, you. Hermione flared a little. Here you see? She pointed the finger at the fact that her hair is pretty neatly styled. Strands in the front are tied back into a ponytail, thereby pinning loose hair. And in front, a pretty cute bang, looking a little to the side. Not a fluffy. Summed up Hermione what I should have seen. Okay, not a fluffy. Maximilian Knight. You are unbearable. She, in the most offended manner, folded her arms over her chest and stared ahead. But the corners of her lips were striving to spread into a smile. Chapter 25. Your set of standard school uniform. Madame Malkin came in with several packages. Will you try it on? No. Hermione shook her head. I completely trust your skill. Pleased to hear. Now it's your turn, young man. I stood on a stool, and the measuring instruments began to dance around me. Listen. Hermione broke the moment's silence when Madame Malkin left. There is something in your words. Let's buy normal textbooks. But what professor recommended such textbooks? Maybe Lockhart himself? The writer will be a professor? At first, Hermione was delighted but then thought. But if he recommended his books, then he may turn out to be a bad teacher. Even with the Order of Merlin. Maybe. Not everyone dares to take this position. Too many professors left it, somewhat rumpled or even dead. Yes, you are right. Surely he decided to advertise himself as well as his books. Then we talked about all sorts of little things until Madame Malkin brought my set of clothes. We paid at the exit, and I put the purchases in my backpack. The next item was a shop with consumables such as pens, ink, parchments, and other little things. Next is the bookstore, but the crowd has not diminished, and it looks like the situation has even worsened. To my surprise, I noticed a red-haired family hurrying from the bank in our direction. And of course, Harry Potter was with them. Still the same shabby, but in an expensive robe. The absurdity of the highest measure. But communicating with the Weasleys, he will never understand that something is wrong with his form. Everything on redheads is always shabby. He is with them just like a native. Hermione and I struggled our way through the crowd of women. Lockhart himself stood in the middle of the store, unfolding books, straightening his portraits, smiling with all 32 teeth, straightening his blonde curls. And his mantle, a pungent lemon color, made my eyes bleed, as did his milky frock coat rich in embroidery. In general, he caused double impressions. On the one hand, a gallant handsome man, a kind of hussar, his chest is bulging, his mustache is not enough. On the other hand, it is overkill with self-praise. It is in every detail. Hermione, from the look on her face, had similar thoughts. We quietly made our way to the second floor and just walked around, chose books, made our own list of data textbooks. Mr. Knight, a familiar voice said from behind. Hermione and I turned around and saw Narcissa. All the same cold detachment with a slight interest in the eyes. Hermione looked at her with some suspicion, at me, at her again, and made some conclusions. Mrs. Malfoy, I replied with a slight smile, bowing my head slightly in greeting. Hermione hastened to do the same. She also gave me a look that literally required a detailed story. She is attentive, although here, you have to be blind to not notice anything. A surprising number of people find this wizard worthy of attention, Narcissa said, glancing down at the crowd. I agree. For this reason, we are selecting textbooks on data from not recommended. Even so? Very wise of you. I can recommend textbooks for the 67th year edited by Rowley. The best available at the moment. Thank you, Mrs. Malfoy. I can show you where they are if you want. You are very kind. Narcissa walked through the rows of wardrobes, and we followed closely behind her. On these shelves? Narcissa said. Besides this, there is still a lot of interesting and useful literature. For those who can find it. Thank you. We started examining the books. Narcissa didn't go anywhere and also looked after something for herself. Going back to our conversation long ago, Mr. Knight. What would you do in that hypothetical situation when a legitimate potion master comes to visit not only for a personal conversation over a glass of Ogden? Tough question, Mrs. Malfoy. Depends on the purpose of the visit, reasons, and motives. If you can sincerely thank for something, then for something else cruciate to madness, cut off the head, impaling it on a stake at the entrance to the house of your ancestors. Very wide range, she said thoughtfully. So the actions of this wizard can extend over an extensive range. On the one hand, it can help to survive something, and on the other hand, it can take something important. Potions and legitimacy are a terrible mixture. Legitimacy? Hermione asked quietly. The science of penetrating someone else's consciousness, reading it and changing it. I answered shortly. The further, the more terrible the fairy tale. Summed up Hermione under the sad smile of Narcissa, who turned to us. You can protect yourself from this, but books on occlumency are not well tolerated. Narcissa vaguely swept her hand around the room. Bright light. Some exclamations, panic, indignation began to be heard from below. Narcissa's face immediately changed, regaining her coldness and aloofness. I'm forced to leave you. Have a good day, Mr. Knight. Narcissa gave Hermione a blank look, turned around, and walked away. We were silent for about a minute, putting the books we needed in piles to take them to the counter. You are very similar. Well, sooner or later, I would have told you anyway. Narcissa is my biological mother. Don't ask how it happened. I only know a couple of facts and no details. Okay. Hermione nodded. You and Draco are completely different. Hermione shook her head thoughtfully. Well, he's Malfoy. I shrugged. And a ritual was performed over me, which did not leave a drop of this lineage blood in me. It seems to me that biologically I can be considered the twin of Narcissa. And a son at the same time. Some kind of magic, Hermione said with a smile. Exactly. Magic. So what do you think about it? Well, know all this? Let's just say I do not regret and do not suffer about this, but I need to find out the details. Just to know how to treat whom. Not all circumstances of life are subject to us. On this note, we went down. There the photo session and the signing of Lockhart continued. Still, in the crowd, every now and then, someone whispered about how Malfoy and the Weasleys' elders managed to fight. We pushed our way through the crowd and put the books on the counter. We quickly settled but were immediately intercepted by Lockhart. Look at these wonderful young wizards that have decided to purchase my complete collected works. With a dazzling smile, he spoke while pushing a stack of books in our direction. With exclusive materials and personal autograph. Lockhart winked. Surprisingly, after a recent peaceful conversation, Hermione was in no rush to buy them. But we paid for them too. An indecent price for books. 6 galleons for fiction. Burned with fiend fire. If my dreams are to be believed, then I know how to summon it. We are not Potter, no one took pictures of us, and we could safely leave the store. The books were safely transferred to my backpack. What do you think, Max, what Mrs. Malfoy meant by bright light? We were already on our way to the exit from Diagon Alley. What do you think? Hermione frowned slightly. Does defense against legilimency belong to the dark arts? Maybe. And it is possible that they are studied inseparably from each other, and legilimency is definitely considered dark. However, not everything is so sad as with the unforgivable. The ministry has full-time legilimens. In general, many people indulge in it, no matter how bad it may sound. And it is not always safe for others. And for the wizard himself. But books on occlumency really need to be searched. But where? I haven't seen anything like this in stores, said Hermione. Well, in Nocturnally. Max. It's not safe there. The girl was weakly indignant. It seems that our friendship still affected her vision of correctness and safety. But what can we do? It is necessary. This is no longer a hypothetical school showdown, and it's too early for us to go into the lion's mouth. We can't make Protego right away. High quality. And it's pretty dangerous there. A person unfamiliar with the girl might think that she was scolding me. Still, in fact, I know that this is her way of conducting an ideological dispute. We? Hermione looked at me with a smile. You didn't think that I would let you go alone on such a dangerous and irresponsible journey? So I shouldn't tell her about it. Because I'm going there today. So, we will go to Nocturnally together only after we learn to fight decently? Or maybe I should contact Flitwick. It seems to me that he can encourage the desire to protect yourself and your loved ones. Exactly. And you know. Hermione became somehow more serious. I can see that something happened to you. Something is bothering you a lot. You can always share and tell. Together we will definitely come up with something. It was impossible not to smile at this girl. As soon as help is needed, you will be the first to know about it. Chapter 26. On that note, we left Diagon Alley through the Leaky Cauldron and entered the regular part of town. There I already saw the Granger's car parked nearby, and we headed towards it. Well, how was your shopping? asked Hermione's mom when her father started to move. Quite good. Hermione began to talk about what we saw, what we bought, and so on while I was in the back seat unloading the girls' purchases from my backpack. At my request, I was dropped off at the bus stop. Should I go to Nocturne Alley? Maybe not worth it. Does life teach me nothing? Perhaps I will learn a lesson from my trip to Paris and will not look for trouble for myself? Judging by the fact that my legs carried me in the direction of the leaky cauldron, I'm still a bit of a fool. I'm in Gryffindor, after all. But the possibility of finding a book on occlumency outweighs the theoretical danger. I got back to the cauldron quickly, and, having thrown on my robe right on the way to the backyard, I waited with some adrenaline anticipation for the opening of the passage. Too long, a full 5 seconds. The anticipation of danger pulled out my memory of those many dreams where something magical was constantly happening. Maneuvering between people with a quick step, I pulled the hood over my head and, with some familiar movement, held my wand over my face. How many times have I dreamed of these movements taken out of context? Everything else was ripped out, though. As a quiet shadow, I slipped to the alley entrance and walked towards the only store I knew of Borgin and Burke's. Nocturne Alley indeed was a dark and unpleasant place, dirty. Unkempt stone walls, rubbish everywhere, even the sky seemed darker here, always somehow cloudy. "Hee hee, boy," came a hoarse voice from the side. "Easy prey with money." I was attacked by a phenomenally criminal-looking type. A dirty bum in rags. Ugly face, greasy hair. He pointed in my direction with his wand, and this scene stirred up a whole heap of memories from my dreams. As if this was not the first time, I sharply pointed my wand at him and instantly made a bunch of gestures. "Camillaris," I said quietly, and an almost invisible transparent clod escaped from the wand. With a disgusting crunch, he crashed into the man and scattered in spiral vortices. The broken figure of a crime flew away into the darkness of the alley, spinning in the direction of these spirals. My heart skipped a couple of beats, but gathering my will into a fist, I moved on, looking at the rare people around or looking out of the alleys. Not everyone here was frankly bad-looking. You could meet quite adequately dressed people, but gloomy. Snape would feel pretty comfortable here. I was overcome with the thought that in dreams after this spell did not survive. The psychological effect was clearly weak because there was no blood, no contemplation of death. But the fact itself. However, I didn't care much. Death is not the end, and I am proof of that. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my reflection in the rare clean windows, just a black figure, under whose hood nothing is visible at all. After a dozen minutes of walking, I found the shop I needed. Against the background of Nocturne Alley, it doesn't look gloomy or dangerous. A dark green sign above the entrance, a pleasant warm yellow light inside, artifact showcases, flasks with all sorts of gloomy things, a real mountain of exciting things. A decent-looking man with curly hair and sideburns stood at the counter. "What do you want?" he asked. "I'm looking for books on occlumency." "In that case, I have something to offer you." The man winked conspiratorially and disappeared behind the counter. Just a few minutes later, he slowly emerged from under the counter, holding a simple book in his hands. Well, yes, if he jumped out like Ollivander, he might have received a couple of curses from the local visitors. "Here." "Good, understandable. But I must warn so that there were no complaints later. The book is prohibited because there is also about legilimency. Not every wizard can reach heights in these sciences, so do not blame me for failures." "I understand," I replied briefly. The seller, it seems, realized that I was not in the mood for dialogue and simply named the price. Not very big, but by no means modest, as for a book. Nearly 20 galleons. After paying and taking the purchase, I nodded curtly and left the shop. Controlling the space and tracking movements around, I left Nocturne Alley. After walking a couple of meters, I moved my wand in front of my face and took off the hood. The book is there. But I'll also ask Flitwick. And I will go here again, but with Hermione, and not soon. Chapter 27. 2 weeks before the start of the new school year passed unnoticed. I was suffering from nightmares and tried to forget them with physical training. Sometimes I immersed myself in old textbooks on data and other books. Occlumency turned out to be quite exciting but horribly boring, monotonous, and complicated science. It takes extraordinary intelligence, endurance, and self-control to master this discipline. The same for legilimency. I haven't touched the latter yet, and there are several reasons for this. There are no experimental subjects, nowhere to practice. The mechanism by which the supervision of improper use of magic is carried out is still unknown. Most likely, it's some kind of area enchantment. It is too problematic to register every magic wand, but to put a spell on the area in which the Muggle-born lives is possible. It will be necessary to find out the details. How many times do I tell myself this? Regarding occlumency, there is absolutely nothing here connected with some kind of shields and so on. It is just control over your own consciousness and subconsciousness, the ability to structure your memories, knowledge, sensations, emotions. Control is the key to success. The mind is not an open book. It cannot be simply read by opening it to the desired page. Just as the legilimate must interpret what he saw in someone else's mind, the occlument needs to show what he wants to divert the agile mind of legilimate aside from the important. For success in occlumency, you need to train memory, attentiveness, be able to look at yourself and your thoughts as if from the outside, with an open mind. If you suddenly start to remember something for no reason when talking with a person, he is digging in your head. There are many different exercises, meditations, and more to achieve the proper level of control. But perhaps the most important skill in occlumency is not thinking about the white monkey. Do not think about the obvious. Literally, deceive yourself. Reading this book made various magic tricks emerge from my nightmares. Among them, you could find several ways to close your consciousness, but all of them, to some extent, turned against me. Loss of empathic sensitivity to others, burning out my own emotions, loss of any of the feelings, in general, that is still a lobotomy. But quickly and efficiently. But I don't want to follow this path. It's better to work on yourself properly than to rush and remain mentally disabled. Therefore, I studied the book, performed various mental exercises, improved mindfulness, learned to hide my consciousness behind a mask. Mental homunculus, which, when needed, would jump out like a devil from the box, taking on the legilimate. And then I will slip the necessary memories, emotions, and sensations. The 1st of September, as always happens, came suddenly. Just waking up one day, I realized that it was time to collect things. The knights gave me a lift to the train station. Having said goodbye to them, I once again rolled the cart with only one chest. The pirate, like last year, will live with the knights and bring me assignments from the regular school. On platform 9 3/4, I immediately took out my wand and shrunk the chest into my pocket. Today I was in black again. Interestingly enough, dreams gradually fade away. Not in terms of quantity, but in terms of influence on me. Almost imperceptibly, but the rotten mood slowly fades into the background. On the train, I walked through the carriages and found Hermione in one of the compartments. "Hi!" I waved my hand. "Hi!" The girl smiled at me, looking up from the book. "Have you already read those textbooks that we bought?" I pulled out the smaller chest, returned it to its original size, shoved it under the seat, and sat down opposite Hermione. "Yeah. Good books. High quality. We will need to buy them for each year." "Of course." The girl nodded. "Good academic text. A minimum of assumptions, a maximum of facts. Capaciously and accurately." "Exactly. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to practice." Hermione smiled wistfully and went back to reading. I decided to follow her example and took out a book on enchantments. The train started, and we drove on in silence. Surprisingly, none of the students were particularly eager to get into our compartment. Students passed by, looked in, but not finding something important for themselves, left. This was repeated over and over again, and even became somewhat annoying. We got some visitors once again. Neville and Seamus. "Hi guys." Neville nodded and asked, embarrassed, "Have you seen Harry and Ron?" "Hi, Neville." I nodded, distracted from my book. No, we haven't. At least me. Hermione shook her head. Weird. Where could they go? Neville said thoughtfully. I bet they again found some adventures for themselves. Smiled Seamus. I remembered that this year we will have the Malfoy's house elf, the 7th Weasley under the influence of the Horcrux, basilisk, petrification, and other crap. How to keep myself and Hermione safe? It's worth thinking about. I have a mirror, but this is not an option. Pictures of radical methods of solving the problem with the help of various spells and rituals with a fatal outcome for both the 7th and the basilisk were spinning in my head. And why haven't I bothered with this question before? Damn. Chapter 28. While I was thinking about the upcoming troubles, a suspicious blue silhouette flashed outside the window, completely incompatible with the views of Scotland's nature. Looking sharply to the side, I saw an entertaining picture. Look, Hermione! Crazy duo in action. I nodded with a grin in the direction of an old flying car, sky blue. What is there? Hermione looked out the window without much enthusiasm and was speechless, frozen for a few seconds with her mouth parted. The faces of Ron and Harry, looking out the windows, were full of panic, mingled with joy. Hermione snapped her teeth. Just phenomenal irresponsibility! The girl was indignant. I don't know what exactly made the guys use such a car instead of a Flynn network, but the scandal will be notable. Hermione became interested in the new information and, waving her hand at her classmates, turned to me. Flynn network? Yeah. One way to move wizards. The most common fireplaces can be connected to this network and move between fireplaces with flying powder. There is a fireplace like this at King's Cross, the Leaky Cauldron, Sweet Kingdom, and Boar's Head. The last 2 establishments are in Hogsmeade. And how do you know everything? Just heard it somewhere. I shrugged. People around tend to give out an incredible amount of useful information. The main thing is to hear it. Of course, there are many more fireplaces, but these are the ones that I know for sure. There is one more address, though. Ministry of Magic. Atrium. This is pretty useful information. It would be much more convenient to move around if the fireplace at home was connected to such a network. Not worth it. I shook my head. Such a fireplace is not only a point of entry but also an exit. Only a house elf or a wizard can close the fireplace from movement, and your parents are ordinary people. An intruder can get into them through the fireplace. Just find out the address of the fireplace. I see. Then really not worth it. By the way, about the house elves. Hermione beamed. In France, I visited such an interesting place as the public library. Magic, of course. There I found a lot of information about the house elves. You know, you were right. They thumb their nose at salary and weekends. Give me some more details. I smiled and made myself comfortable. The girl perked up a little and enthusiastically began to share her findings. House elves are unable to generate magic and really absorb it from the world around them. At the same time, they feed on this very magic and without it weaken, wither, go crazy and die. There are several theories about their origins, but this is not so important. House elves, to maintain their lives, establish a connection with wizards, and in exchange for work, they receive magic. On the one hand, you might think that they are forced to work for food, but for house elves, magic is everything. And doing some work is in their blood. Even without a connection, they will try to serve, to do something for someone they cannot do otherwise. But at the same time, they are still very badly treated. Hermione summed up. It is not right. After all, they do a lot for wizards, and in the end, they only receive punishments. But there are also pitfalls here. Hermione looked thoughtful. It seems that she has not yet understood how she should treat this information. What? House elves seek to punish themselves? The punishment diminishes their magic pool, and they start trying harder. So this is just their natural motivation mechanism. It turns out that by depriving the house elves of punishment, you seem to deprive them of the opportunity to motivate themselves. Then they will harm themselves, without outside interference, but at the same time, they will suffer. They are strange. You look at the question as a human, that's one. As a person from modern society with modern values, that's two. And they are just different. That's all. It's a pity. They look so miserable. Here, I agree. They really look heartbroken. Moreover, it does not depend on their happiness, they will always look like that. I think you can make at least one house elf happy if you tie it to you. Hermione was somewhat skeptical about the thought and shook her head. No, Max, I'm not yet ready to change my attitude to what is happening so drastically. Then let's leave this conversation. During almost a third of the trip, all students periodically had a unique opportunity to look at a strange blue car flying after the train. She appeared and disappeared again, and I would like to know what will be said about this at Hogwarts. Hermione and I had the privilege of seeing this sight 4 more times. In one of such turns of a flying Ford, Hermione almost choked on a breadcrumb from a sandwich too suddenly. A car appeared literally a couple of meters from the window. You will not change? Hermione asked as the train was approaching Hogsmeade. Nope. I waved my hand. I can be present at the feast in this anyway. I'll just put on my mantle. As you wish. She is already in uniform right from home, as I understand it. The Hogsmeade platform greeted us with the same darkness as the last time. Still, now we did not have to wait for Hagrid, and we simply went with most of the students to the carriages standing nearby. I saw the Thestrals. Large black creatures, more like skin-covered skeletons of horses. But they differed from ordinary horses with leather wings folded behind their backs and a likeness of a beak. Glancing at Hermione, I realized that she did not see them, and when would she manage to see and realize death? Climbing into the carriage, I helped Hermione to climb, sitting next to her. A couple of minutes later, Neville stuck his head through the doorway. May I join you? Come on, climb. The boy smiled modestly and climbed a little awkwardly inside. It's kind of cold this fall, he remarked distantly, sitting down opposite and looking out the window. The weather for this autumn, in general, promises to be stormy. Hermione nodded. In a couple of minutes the carriages started to move. In 15 minutes, we were already disembarking at the gate of the castle. Students in discordant rows, breaking into companies, briskly walked to Hogwarts in anticipation of a feast. Hermione and I had eaten already, who's smarter, too. Still, I bet many stoically endured inconveniences, almost breaking into a run. But where is the hurry? The feast will not start until the end of the distribution. Chapter 29. Upon arrival at the Great Hall, we hastened to take our seats. At our table, the guys were whispering and trying to find out where Harry and Ron had gone. Right here, at the big table, the most ridiculous rumors were born from the fusion of the train seen outside the windows and speculation of fantasy. But the conversation subsided as soon as McGonagall ushered in the frightened first years into the Great Hall. Well, not that scared, but they were panicked and worried for sure. We watched the distribution with mediocre interest, although we supported those entering our house with applause. From those who I more or less know from the tale of Potter, Colin Creevey and the 7th Weasley joined us. If the first one looked like that curly blonde guy from the movie, then the 7th Weasley was prettier. Although, everyone has their own idea of beauty. I just noted a not-so-square oval face. More proportional features and less thin lips. Why am I surprised? Here everything is somewhat different, and this can vary from an imperceptible minimum to entirely different people. In addition to these two, I could not miss the familiar surnames. Lovegood, for example. Floating blonde with a shock of long curly hair. Or here's Astoria Greengrass. Almost the opposite of a sister. A brunette with a mischievous, lively look. She reacted happily to Slytherin from the hat and cheerfully settled down next to her sister. Strange though, isn't she kind of even younger? Or not? Oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Of course, these were not all newcomers, but somehow it was not particularly interesting to me. After the distribution, Dumbledore introduced Lockhart, pompous to the pain in the eyes, and Snape left the room. The meal, with plenty of food, was remarkably calm in Ron's absence. I never even noticed before how this redhead managed to bring a piece of chaos to any event. Now the Gryffindor table was just a noisy place with a bunch of funny, careless, and frivolous people. Maybe they did not shine here with table etiquette, but everything was within limits of decency. After the feast, everyone hurried to the living rooms, and Hermione and I were no exception. We settled down on a sofa in a dark corner and just watched. The twins tried to provoke some of the younger ones into Gryffindor's stupidity and sign up for an experimental bunny role. Several groups of girls of different ages were discussing something and giggling, flipping through magazines. Someone was playing chess, someone was eagerly exchanging impressions of the holidays. And everyone was looking forward to Harry and Ron's arrival. The fact that they flew to school in a car was known to many, but it turned out that they also crashed into a whomping willow, smashed the Ford, which left them by leaving in the forest. When Harry and Ron entered the living room, many rushed to express their admiration for this indeed Gryffindor act. "This is some kind of madness." Hermione shook her head. "Madness? It's Gryffindor," I answered with a pretentious look and immediately got a jab in the side. "I hope it's not contagious." Hermione looked at me with a smile. "You know, me too." The party about how Harry and Ron returned to school continued for quite some time, but Hermione decided to go to bed. I must go too. For 2 long weeks at Hogwarts, students spent time talking about Harry and Ron's fabulous appearance. Only in mid-September, the excitement subsided, but Malfoy was in no hurry to give up, every now and then trying to somehow hurt either Harry or Ron. Draco was especially good at the latter because Ron does not have such a quality of character as a restraint. The howler from Molly Weasley added fuel to the fire. No need to guess who it was intended for. So, Ron received his longed-for piece of fame in full. The data lessons were taught this year by the famous writer Gilderoy Lockhart. There were a lot of people looking forward to it, and I can't blame them. If you do not focus on some details, Lockhart is indeed a star who skillfully uses it. In the absence of serious competition in his industry, he is truly unique. He attracts glances, attention, literally forcing them to talk about himself. And if not for one of his flaws' excessive, simply boundless vanity, he would have had more respect for himself. But, before our first data lesson, a new local photographer showed himself. Colin Creevey blinded everyone with a sudden flash by photographing Potter. Lockhart suddenly appeared from around the corner in an ivory suit and robe. He immediately took Potter and Creevey into circulation, took a couple of joint pictures, and hinted to Potter about his actions' correctness. "Giving out autographed photos at this stage of your career is the height of prudence." Lockhart grinned. "The time will come, and you, like me now, will need to have a pack of such photos ready." After his speech, Lockhart walked into the data office, allowing us to sit in our places. It amused me how some of the Slytherins still grimaced at what they saw Harry and Lockhart posing for the Creevey. We took our seats, and as I looked at Hermione, I saw hope in her eyes. Obviously, she hoped that Lockhart would still be a good teacher. Do not hope for the best to be less disappointed. Not expecting from myself, I spoke quietly so that only Hermione could hear. "Who said that?" "Me." Lockhart walked around the classroom, examined everyone with a smile, took a book from the first desk that came to hand. "By the Path of the Trolls." Our new professor defiantly lifted the book and showed his portrait on the cover, completely copying the pose and smile. "It's me," he said, winking immediately. "As well as a portrait. Gilderoy Lockhart, Knight of the Order of Merlin of the 3rd degree, honorary member of the League of Defense Against the Dark Forces, and 5-time winner of the Magic Weekly Prize for the most charming smile. But let's not talk about it." Lockhart returned the book to its owner, Neville, and continued. "Believe me, I didn't get rid of the band and banshee by smiling at her." A couple of students smiled sourly while Hermione and I looked closely at the professor. A plan suddenly appeared in my head. Ingenious and insane. Although it is not insane at all, it will work. I leaned closer to Hermione, not taking my eyes off Lockhart, and whispered softly. "Let him believe that we admire him. This is our pass to the forbidden section." Hermione thought for a couple of seconds and realized the prospects. Her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. The stranger might have thought that the girl suddenly fell in love with Lockhart. But I know she fell in love with the prospect of being in the forbidden section of the Hogwarts library. Meanwhile, Lockhart continued to talk. I see you all bought a complete set of my books. How wonderful it is! Let's start the lesson with a test, but don't be alarmed. I just want to check how carefully you read them and what you learned. Lockhart walked around the classroom, handing out the sheets with questions to everyone, returned to the teacher's table, and smiled dazzlingly. I'll give you half an hour. You can start. I immediately turned to Hermione. Don't misunderstand, but I didn't read them. From the point of view of the educational process, that was right. Hermione nodded. I remember them all. I will help. Thanks. Together we answered all sorts of absurd questions, the essence of which was completely reduced to a description of Lockhart, his interests, preferences, desires, and other personal things. At the end of the allotted time, we handed over the work, and Lockhart quickly examined the results. As a result, he lamented that few students are really familiar with his work and, in fact, are not his fans. However, he praised the drum roll, Hermione's, and my work and awarded us 10 points each. Oh, how many strange and reproachful looks from the students I noticed, with difficulty restraining a smile. Chapter 30. The further lesson turned into a mess as soon as Lockhart released the freshly picked Cornish pixies from the cage. These little lilac besties made a real mess. They stole and threw Lockhart's wand out of the window, drove him under the table, and then kicked him out of the office altogether. Pixies tugged Neville by the ears, threw books at the guys, doused Malfoy with some nasty stuff, and these are just their most harmless pranks. Hermione and I took refuge under Protego Totalis, forming a typical dome for two. Surprisingly, the picture of total chaos and disorder only spurred our imagination, allowing us to build a pretty decent dome that does not lend itself to pixies, nor books, nor inkpots. It will be difficult for me to play admiration. Hermione watched Lockhart, hiding in her office, with a displeased look. With your memory, you really need to visit the section. I just can't remember everything alone. Just a few minutes later, Hermione got tired of this chaos. Hold the shield, please. I nodded and redoubled my focus on the spell. It was given to me with some difficulty. And why weren't these protective charms in those dreams? When I completely took control of the defense, Hermione freely pulled out her wand and gave a short and quick series of swings. Impedimenta spacis. The verbal formula ended with a wave outlining the space, and everything around seemed to be stuck in liquid jelly, people, objects, pixies. I let go of Protego and also waved my wand, pointing to the cage. Insemantis pixie. All the pixies were forced into the cage as if they were being sucked there, like into a funnel. Now I calmly walked over and locked the cage. The students in the class stopped squealing indignantly and stared at me. The silence was broken by Neville's fall from the chandelier where the pixies had thrown him. A wonderful lesson, I remarked with a smile, returning to my seat. It's really going to be difficult. Hermione sighed as we packed our things. 20 points to Gryffindor! Exclaimed Lockhart, leaning out of the doorway of his office, and proudly walked up to his desk. A beautiful enchantment demonstrated by Mr. Knight and Miss Granger. Just great! You have completed a real challenge. However, the students were extremely skeptical, but some of the girls breathed in admiration for Lockhart. I don't know what they admire there when they see such stars. I had some concerns about Snape. According to the canon, he was friends with Lucius, and at the moment, he could well be aware of Malfoy Sr.'s plans about me. But he absolutely did not show any emotions about me. He, as always, was pestered by the fact of Potter's existence on this sinful land, and he did not miss the opportunity to remind him and Ron of the full extent of their mental retardation. Surprisingly, instead of raising their knowledge to an acceptable level, the golden duo only spit on potions even more. At one time, in a past life, I studied at a music school. A very strict and mischievous piano teacher, the red-haired version of Snape, rarely spoke flatteringly about my skills. Oh, I was offended, yes, but not much. Much more, I tried to prove her wrong about me, so I tried to be the best. It is not for the sake of praise, but simply to learn to play better than others and better than her. At the final exam, I played so that the guys, teachers, and parents applauded, almost standing up. There was no longer that touchy 7-year-old that came to class but a 14-year-old teenager. Did I want to scream? Ha! What do you say now? For the whole hall? A little bit. But I was more grateful for that rude but challenging approach. But with these two, such a thing will definitely not work. Lockhart's failure on the first lesson was a topic of the discussion, gradually supplanting Potter and Ron's antics. I bet that if it were not for Lockhart, they would have been procrastinating on this topic for another 2 months. As I learned, Lockhart failed not only in our class but also in other classes and quickly changed his teaching tactics. No more living magical creatures, now we have more theatrical scenes. It was Potter who had the dubious honor of playing the role of some kind of monster that Lockhart heroically copes with, not forgetting to mention the color and style of the outfit, the wind-blowing lush blonde hair, and so on. Both had a theatrical talent, so it turned out completely useless from the educational process's point of view, but very funny as an entertainment event. Hermione and I, with incredible tenacity, pretended to be loyal Lockhart fans, which made the professor incredibly happy and irritated the rest of the guys who liked and disliked him. And almost all the boys didn't like him because the girls liked him. In addition to the male part of Hogwarts' student population, Lockhart managed to get tired of him, of almost all teachers, with his inappropriate advice and recommendations. The most interesting thing is that his advice was half efficient, as if he grabbed complex matters at the top and is now actively pushing his opinion and position to the masses. He strongly reminded me of a couple of my acquaintances from a past life. They knew a lot about cars, but only from rumors or text, never driving or repairing specific cars. They may have been able to impress some ignorant person with their versatile knowledge. Still, for those people who are directly familiar with the topic under discussion, this couple caused only irritation, laughter, or disdain. Lockhart is the same.
That is all for today. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. If you have any suggestions or feedback for me, please drop a comment down below.